Evan, come here. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time publicly at Vance, Mr. and Mrs. Evan Williams. We wish you a lifetime of happiness.
Thank you.
Evan, what's your anniversary date? Get a tattoo, buddy. Get a tattoo. October 12th, they were married. This is the first time they've been back with us. From the Old Testament comes a reading from the prophet Joel. Hear this word from God. O children of Zion, be glad and rejoice in the Lord your God, for he has given the early rain for your vindication. He has poured down for you abundant rain, the early and the later rain, as before. The threshing floor shall be full of grain, and vats shall overflow with wine and oil. I will repay you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter, with my great army, which I sent against you. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never again be put to shame. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I, the Lord, am your God, and there is no other. And my people shall never again be put to shame. Then afterward I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your old men shall see dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even on the male and the female slaves in those days, I will pour out my spirit. I will show portents in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. And the sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be those who escape, as the Lord has said, and among the survivors shall be those whom the Lord calls. In continuing our look at the Gospel of Luke, we turn to the 18th chapter, starting at the 9th verse. Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves and were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We begin today with a story from Andrew Greeley. Andrew Greeley is a very well-known contemporary priest, Catholic priest, and sociologist. And this he writes, once upon a time, not so very long ago, there was a Mrs. Church in Our Lady of Mercy parish. Mrs. Church seemed to do everything and be everywhere. At one time or another, and often simultaneously, she was head of the Altar Society, a Eucharistic minister, a lunch mother, a playground guard, president of the parish council, minister of care, representative to the diocesan council, and a close friend and confidant of the pastor. Mrs. Church's neighbor, on the other hand, was a divorced mother of three, who worked full-time and always declined Mrs. Church's invitations to participate in parish activities. Perish the thought. See, that was funny, see? Don't roll your eyes at me. She said she just didn't have time. And after noticing that her neighbor appeared to be dating, Mrs. Church mentioned in confidence to the pastor that though she knew the church allowed the divorced to partake in the Eucharist, she wondered if it was actually a good example for the young people to see that. Later, the pastor announced that in honor of the church's 50th anniversary, the parish council had established an annual Our Lady of Mercy Award to be given to the person who demonstrated qualities of the parish patroness, who is like Our Lady of Mercy. Everyone, included Mrs. Church herself, expected her to be the first recipient. A special review committee was established to consider those who were nominated for the award. Imagine Mrs. Church's surprise when her neighbor was chosen for the honor, for her work in establishing a community program for battered women and children. Getting this program off the ground had been the reason she hadn't had time for Mrs. Church's programs. Fairly good contemporary telling, I think, of the story. One must be careful what we pray for and how we pray. John Calvin said the things that make our prayers void are contempt for others, and contentment with ourselves. This story, in very real ways, is one that says, don't get too big for your britches, y'all. Don't think you're more important than you really are. If Calvin were here, he would say, don't forget that you are the creature and God is the creator. In contemporary, what is going on with this? In contemporary best practice parlance, what we might say today is, stay in your lane. You're the creature. God's the creator. You don't get to say, hey, look at me, look at me, look at me, I'm great. I donated 5 bags of candy for trunk or treat, gave 5 containers of hot dogs. I'm going to have 2 trunks up there, and I'm bringing all 7 of my grandkids to run through the building. Ain't I good? And all the while, I donated it to the food pantry, gave 1/10 of my income, and I'm praying and fasting on Tuesday to make sure everything's a great success. Check, check, check. Our spirituality is not a checklist. We don't get to say, look at us, we did more and better than everybody else. We also don't get to say, look at her, woeful sinner that she is. We all know about you. We've all heard your kid got picked up in the Vance parking lot for buying weed. We all heard your husband's having an affair. We all heard you stole money from your company. We've all heard about that. You know how that goes? Let me remind you, you all know people. Perfectly lovely paragons of virtue in our churches and in our communities who look like they have it all. People with big fancy houses and high-powered jobs and beautiful families. And if you talk to them privately, all of them may be about to crumble. Be very careful about lifting yourself up or putting someone else down, because we never know what circumstances surround our neighbors and friends. And here is what I know about this. Some of you are saying, well, I would never do that, but they might. That's exactly what we're talking about. Pay attention. Pay attention to your prayers. Now, it's okay, to ask God for help. It is also okay to say, God, thank you for making me a decent preacher that people can hear your word through my words. That's not bragging, that's not boasting, that's just being grateful for the gifts that I've been given. But it's another thing to say, thank you for making me a better preacher than Billy Graham. Because that I'm really grateful for. And if these people out here would just appreciate that I'm a better preacher than Billy Graham, all would be well. So God, can you make that happen? Can you work on that, please? No, in this parable, Jesus is saying that's not the way it works. Jesus is encouraging us to be humble of heart. And you know how hard it is to preach on being humble? Almost as hard as it is to be humble. Because the minute you say, be careful. Here's my advice to you. It sounds like I'm not being humble, but really, Jesus here is the one that's saying, don't put yourself first. And also don't put others down. And the reason Jesus says that is because Jesus knows that God is the creator. God is the one who is really first. And God is the one who will not allow another to be put down because the other is also God's child. So 2 things today, dear ones. 1, pray. Pray, pray, pray. And 2, when you do, approach God with a humble heart, waiting to hear what God has in store for you and what adventure is next. Thanks be to God. Amen.